ये जो लैंडस्केप प्रायोरिटाइजेशन है ये काफ़ी सालों से हो रहा है भारत में. So we have a long history of conservation planning in India. From the first meeting of the Indian Board for Wildlife in 1952, the setting up of individual protected areas, that was all conservation planning. Project Tiger was conservation planning. India's adoption of the Ramsar Convention, signatory to various international conventions, citing was conservation planning. Rogers and Pawar 1988 was an all-India exercise, of course dominated by large vertebrates, but nevertheless it was an all-India exercise, the first of its kind. It was conservation planning. The UNESCO World Heritage Convention and India's all the sites that in India that are nominated as UNESCO World Heritage Natural Sites, the important bird areas, the WWF Veterans Directory that came out a few decades ago, and of course a lot of work in the Western Ghats. These have all been examples of conservation planning at some scale or the other. And even in individual states, the work done by different foundations, combination of civil society and government folks, whether it's in Maharashtra, Madhya Pradesh, they've all had an element of conservation planning. So what we're talking about today is not something new. It's been happening for a long time. Throughout the Western Ghats, it was adopted by the state governments, and you must congratulate the state governments of Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Karnataka and Maharashtra that within a few, 15 years of that exercise, almost all the gaps that have been identified as part of this conservation planning exercise have been filled, either in the form of extension of protected areas, or conservation reserves, or work on corridors. New protected areas as well have been established. So it's not as if that conservation planning doesn't work. It's not only about some pretty maps on some paper somewhere, but actually it can make a difference. Because of this work, we also had the nomination of the Western Ghats as a World Heritage Cluster, and I can tell you, given the pressure on the Western Ghats over the decades, these labels make a difference. They're not enough, but they do help. And even the folks working on, for example, the coal mining areas in central India, they come to people working on conservation planning. They ask, give us a map showing important biodiversity areas so that we can actually pursue our activist agenda. So in that sense, I think that we must appreciate the role that it can play. If you actually have networking and you actually think that conservation planning eventually needs to be put into practice. Now coming to description of what this is about. This is an effort that was again collaborative. You can see all the institutions that are represented here, and it was part of the National Mission on Biodiversity and Human Well-being. This work was funded by public money, Government of India funds, and so any information or any data that is publicly funded should be made available for benefit of every citizen in the country who is interested or concerned about this issue. So that's the spirit with which this was done. And a lot of the people and institutions who are represented in this particular piece of work are also sprinkled somewhere in the audience or thereabouts. Positive critical thoughts on gaps remaining from this piece of work also would be very useful for us to build on. So what's new about what has been done? Apart from the fact that it's been done by a bunch of civil society organizations and government funded organizations using public money, collaborative efforts, so that of course is a nice thing. One thing new is that we have always had biodiversity prioritization exercises done. So here we are combining a couple of ecosystem services that matter a lot, especially water and of course carbon as well. Combining that with biodiversity. We have also taken advantage of some recent advances in our knowledge of ecosystems, especially in the water cycle, and that is very pertinent for Central India. The synergies and trade-offs between ecosystem services is recognized and incorporated into the thinking behind this paper, so that is another thing that I would say is new. We have also addressed the issue of greening is not always good. Greening in the wrong place, in the wrong ecosystem, can actually be detrimental to local biodiversity, local livelihoods, and biodiversity of that area, ecosystem services, especially the hydrological side. So we have addressed that. We note that land sharing and land sparing both are critical for the success of India's conservation in the coming decades. We have seen examples of land sparing. Kanha National Park Tiger Reserve is an example of land sparing. But if we really have to conserve the bulk of India's biodiversity, which exists outside the protected area system, we have to think creatively about land sharing. And there are a lot of challenges there. There are limits to land sharing depending on the scale. There are sensitive species, sensitive ecosystems where land sharing can be very difficult at times, and so it's not going to be easy. And then the other thing is that we have tried to link with existing national initiatives like the NCCI Ayog's aspirational districts, which is basically based on human development indices. All districts in India are classified into different categories, and aspirational districts are those districts which are ranking low on the human development indices, where the NCCI Ayog, which is the equivalent, the premier planning body currently in our system, needs to address. Some of the advances in knowledge that we have taken advantage of, I think I should share with this audience. One is that the relationship between hydrologic services and forest cover or tree cover is complicated. You can have the sponge effect where the infiltration and recharge dominates. So as you increase tree cover, you can actually have an increase in dry season stream flow. You can have a situation where the infiltration and the evapotranspiration balance each other out, and you may not have much difference in the dry season stream flow as you change tree cover. Or you could have an evapotranspiration dominated mechanism, for example, when you plant trees on grasslands, where evapotranspiration is definitely going to dominate, and you're actually going to get a reduction in hydrologic benefits with tree cover. So this is something that we need to keep in mind when we are planning the Green India Mission or afforestation and so on. The other thing that has emerged in the last few decades, earlier people only used to talk about blue water floods, which is the water in groundwater and in our rivers and lakes, surface water and groundwater. That's blue water. But green water is that water that comes as rainfall and it's transformed by vegetation back into water vapor through a process called evapotranspiration. And there's a huge forests and other ecosystems, wetlands, they all act as huge pumps which basically convert the rainfall into water vapor, and most of that green water eventually gets recycled as rainfall. There was not much knowledge about this. Earlier scientists used to think that this happens only in Amazon or the Congo, where you have large, hundreds of thousands of square kilometers of forests are required for this mechanism to actually have an impact on rainfall. Now, if you look at evidence, this is a paper that was published in 2012, and you can see that they've again focused on the big forested regions around the world. But those dotted areas in India, even though it didn't merit so much of a mention in the paper itself, actually shows the areas where any air parcel that's passing over vegetation gets moistened twice as much as an air parcel that's not passing over a nearby area which doesn't have forest vegetation over it. So this, even though India doesn't figure, because we compare to the rest of the big green areas, we have what many folks would look at as scattered bits and pieces of forest, but actually you can see that actually it's significant even for India as well. So this is the first piece of evidence, and this includes central India also. The central Indian highlands pump a lot of of green water into the atmosphere, and it delays the end of the monsoon in September. I'll just get to that. So when I took out the maps from that paper, you can see the Western Ghats and Central India are playing a key role in this green water recycling as back as rainfall. So this is a very important mechanism which has not been highlighted by conservationists, and even by the scientists who are involved in work like this, they haven't really made the connection with conservation. So the Western Ghats is a very important source of because of the evergreen forest, because of the continuous stretch along the west coast of India. It pumps a lot of this green water flux into the atmosphere. And then there was this paper which was from people, scientists in IIT Mumbai, who showed that the green water flux from the Western Ghats benefits the dry plains in Tamil Nadu, the water deficit plains in Tamil Nadu. So this modeling work was again done a few years back. It's a published paper in Geophysical Research Letters, very high profile journal as far as scientists are concerned, but very few people in Karnataka or Tamil Nadu who are fighting over the Kaveri water actually know that Western Ghats is important for the future of agriculture and overall human well-being in Tamil Nadu. So this, even though India doesn't figure, because we compared to the rest of the big green areas, we have what many folks would look at as scattered bits and pieces of forest, but actually they are actually significant for India as well. So this is the first piece of evidence, and this includes Central India also. The Central Indian highlands pump a lot of green water into the atmosphere, and it delays the end of the monsoon in September. I'll just get to that. So when I took out the maps from that paper, you can see the Western Ghats and Central India are playing a key role in this green water recycling as back as rainfall. So this is a very important mechanism which has not been highlighted by conservationists, and even by the scientists who are involved in work like this, they haven't really made the connection with conservation. So the Western Ghats is a very important source of because of the evergreen forest, because of the continuous stretch along the west coast of India. It pumps a lot of this green water flux into the atmosphere. And then there was this paper which was from people, scientists in IIT Mumbai, who showed that the green water flux from the Western Ghats benefits the dry plains in Tamil Nadu, the water deficit plains in Tamil Nadu. So this modeling work was again done a few years back. It was published in Geophysical Research Letters, very high profile journal as far as scientists are concerned, but very few people in Karnataka or Tamil Nadu who are fighting over the Kaveri water actually know that Western Ghats is important for the future of agriculture and overall human well-being in Tamil Nadu. Coming to Central India. So the Central Indian forests, apart from the forests in Northeast India, they play a very critical role because of the evapotranspiration. So when you see Central India, the forests in Central India is partly responsible for delaying the withdrawal of the summer monsoon over Central and Northern India. So this is a very important role performed by the Central Indian highland forests. So this is again something, it stays in a peer-reviewed paper. Nobody makes a connection with conservation. Nobody takes it to decision makers or policy makers. Again, to show this is the decline of the Indian monsoon, which is observed since the 1950s. And so along with the moderate decline in the Indian monsoons in the 1950s because of the warming of the seas, so the thermal gradient between the neighboring seas and the Indian mainland is reduced. There are various other mechanisms involved. But I just want to draw your attention to the fact that even for the decline in the Indian monsoon since the 1950s, Central India and Western Ghats are all our hotspots. So Central India is very important from various points of view, including climate change. Look at this recent map on severe storms produced by our friend and colleague Roxy Magical in the Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology. You can see that central India is again a very important hotspot. So when we talk about vulnerability and exposure and hazards, the three dimensions of risk, central India is out there. We need to take this message to our policy and decision makers. Greening and browning of India. So there is greening and browning both occurring in India for a variety of reasons, climatic, non-climatic. In some cases, the greening, for example, prosopis growing in some semi-arid areas or tree plantations coming up on grasslands, that greening is not necessarily very good for ecosystem services or biodiversity. And there are some types of browning which can get you to greater frequency of fires. In some cases, shifts in crops because of depletion of groundwater, and so many other reasons. So we are now trying to understand where India is greening, where is it browning, which ones are good, which ones are bad, and what can we do about it. So this was some of the work that contributed to this new type of prioritization exercise where we could combine knowledge and information on ecosystem services, the synergies and trade-offs between them, and biodiversity and habitat. So as I said, this is it was done over a 2-year period, 18 authors, and I'm just an ambassador for everybody here, so it's a privilege for me to represent this work on behalf of so many people. And the details and the technical part, you can read the paper and see for yourself, but overall, we have this natural habitats. We have now recently surpassed China last week or so we are the most populous country on earth. And then we have to conserve our biodiversity and also ensure human well-being. And this is basically the context. Identify priority landscapes and safeguard them. And which landscape do we choose and why? And once chosen, how do we balance cooperation and human interest? So that's basically what we attempted to do. So of course we relied upon the biogeographic zone classification which has been done by Rogers and Pawar earlier. And then we identified key habitats. And the habitat is often in the past has been biased towards forested areas. So if you take the global biodiversity hotspots in India, the Western Ghats and Northeast India or Indo-Burma, they are all mega diverse in that sense. But you will not find Central India or other peninsular habitats coming as global biodiversity hotspots. So in those types of prioritizations, these areas get left out. So what we did is that we included 28 habitat types that included various forests of different types, grassland, scrub, ravines, riverine vegetation, swamps, all of that was included. So we were able to select and prioritize not only the most dominant habitats in each zone, but also those areas with unique rare, threatened and dwindling habitats. And we did it biogeographic zone by biogeographic zone. So you're not comparing apples and oranges. You obviously are not going to get a high carbon, high density forest in a semi-arid area. But you do have endemic species there, spiny-tailed lizard, wild ass, water wolf, all of that, which can not live anywhere else. So, or the Great Indian mustard for that matter. So the prioritization was done within each biogeographic zone and not nationally. Because if you do it nationally, then you're going to get again the Western Ghats and the Northeast India predominantly. In terms of ecosystem services, we had water, and we had both blue water and green water, which has been done for the first time in India. Everybody thinks about water only in terms of blue water. We have included blue water and green water. Green water is basically also includes your rain-fed millet growing areas. So most of agriculture in India is actually green water based, rain-fed. There's only some areas which actually have access to irrigation, which is blue water. And that access to blue water is often, because of growing water-intensive crops, has actually sucked our rivers dry, depleted our groundwater. So we need to move from blue to green eventually. Important ecosystem services that were combined with information on habitats and biodiversity areas. So the biodiversity areas, based on whatever information is available in public domain, included threatened mammals, birds, amphibians, reptiles, and areas where these species may be found in relatively large numbers because you need to have viable populations. We used an index for each zone that captured the diversity of threatened species, and also all types of other categories, whether it's protected areas, key biodiversity areas, all of that were included for prioritizing sites. So you can look at the high priority districts, you can look at potential priority districts to overlap with the NITI Aayog districts, where the NITI Aayog wants to channelize a lot of government funding from different line departments in those areas. So this is where we can have a dialogue with them in terms of how certain types of projects, the type of development that is pursued in these districts is going to matter a lot for the future of biodiversity in the coming decades. So if we are not able to influence what is going to happen in these districts, we may lose the plot. And so we need to have various different mechanisms. Land sparing is of course there, but there's very little area left for land sparing. And it's going to be more and more difficult to set up new protected areas where you have curtailment of right to use resources and so on. And also, just to point out, there are positive things too. Tamil Nadu is the first state in the country to have a policy on invasive species. Then we need to think about regional messaging for the Central Indian landscape and raise more awareness through this network. For biodiversity conservation, I think we should, what they say in Hindi, chillu par pani mein doob jana chahiye.